You're probably already aware that old Route 66 is enjoying a resurgence of interest. Get your kicks, you've heard people say. Pile into a classic Corvette like this one and cruise down the Mother Road. Well, classic car culture is an important part of the transportation puzzle. Yet we have some miles to cover before we reach those carefree days with poodle skirts and blue suede shoes. When we speak about the history of transportation in these United States, we talk about the American dream. We've all dreamt it. We all spend our lives as Americans hoping the future will be better for those who come after us. So too did the dreamers who shaped transportation as we know it today. Perhaps no phrase has so greatly influenced transportation as the one often credited to Horace Greeley, a New York Tribune editor. "Go west, young man, go west," Greeley repeated in 1851. And go west the young men and young women did. By 1857, more than 165,000 people had migrated to California by land. Stagecoach roads crisscrossed the continent. Yet, there was no all-weather transportation network.
The national road began in 1806 through an act of Congress, which was signed by President Thomas Jefferson. It was America's first interstate highway. It was designed to connect the waters of the Atlantic to the waters of the Ohio River. It took about 20 years worth of construction for the road to reach that point. Once it did, Congress extended the road further west into the states of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. Once it reached central Illinois, about 10 years later, the road went no further because of the advent of the railroad.
The first steam-powered railroad in the U.S. began operation in 1831 in Charleston, South Carolina. 38 years later, the East was linked with the West at Promontory Summit, Utah. There, on May 10th of 1869, railroad officials marked the completion of the first transcontinental railroad with the driving of 4 symbolic spikes, 2 of them forged in gold. Now, the journey across America would only take 4 days instead of months. Our nation became a much smaller place. Freedom has always been part of the American dream, and freedom to move wherever you want, whenever you want, is part of that dream. Trains allowed people to travel for leisure and enjoyment, yet trains packed travelers into a boxcar and mandated they stick to a railroad schedule. Mobility unfettered, that's what the population craved, and that explains why, by the mid-1890s, more than 1 million bicycles had been sold to the American public. The discovery of the new low-wheeler bicycle shown at the 1876 Centennial Exposition launched this bicycle craze. It was much easier to master than the more challenging and expensive high-wheeler. The impact of this pedal-powered people mover on society was remarkable. Women's rights activist Susan B. Anthony said that bicycles did more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. Even Groucho Marx, speaking years later in the movie Monkey Business, paid homage to the cycling revolution in his own roundabout way. "Gentlemen," he quipped, "I say just this. The bicycle will never replace the horse. On the other hand, the horse will never replace the bicycle." Which is quite a horse on the bicycle if I ever saw one, and I don't think I ever have. Freedom now truly meant taking to one's wheels, and those wheels were about to take their riders places they never imagined they could go. 2 visionaries who saw the promise in the world's new wheels were Orville and Wilbur Wright, brothers who acquired mechanical expertise selling and repairing bicycles. The Wrights set out to invent a vehicle that could fly. In the fall of 1902, they made more than 1,000 glider flights. Not satisfied, the brothers added a small engine and propellers to their design, driven by a chain and sprocket system similar to that found on a bicycle. On December 17, 1903, the Wright brothers soared into history at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, making 4 successful airplane flights. Soon the skies were whirling with wings. Eventually, Orland Corbin would even market the Baby Ace, an airplane one could piece together and fly at home. The national bicycle craze continued to rage, spawning, at its peak, the Good Roads movement. New Jersey led the charge in seeking to appease the throngs of cyclists clamoring for paths on which to ride. In Detroit, along Woodward Avenue, the country's first mile of concrete highway was laid in 1909. The following year, interest in the bicycle began to wane, and a number of bicycle manufacturers in Michigan and Ohio turned their attentions toward the production of a newfangled vehicle, the automobile. By this time, the idea of marrying motors to wheels was not altogether new. As early as 1901, the Indian Motorcycle Manufacturing Company had unveiled its prototype. In 1903, William and Walter Harley, along with boyhood chum Arthur Davidson, had built their first motorbike. Yet early automobiles were met with more skepticism. Naysayers believed these four-wheeled contraptions were playthings of the rich, a fancy fad that would quickly fade. Money talks, and where the common man was concerned, early automobiles clearly said, "You can't buy me." All of that began to change in 1908, when Henry Ford built his first production Model T at Detroit's Piquette Avenue plant. 5 years later, Ford installed the first conveyor belt-based assembly line in his factory at Highland Park. This assembly line allowed a typical Model T to be pieced together in 93 minutes. Over the next 19 years, Ford sent some 15 million of his finished cars rolling into the streets. The Model T was roomy enough to seat the average American family. More importantly, its price tag accommodated the average family's pocketbook. From state to state, fledgling highway organizations arose to name, mark, and promote transcontinental routes. Some of the earliest cross-country thoroughfares were the Lincoln Highway, running from New York to San Francisco, the Yellowstone Trail, a good road from Plymouth Rock to Puget Sound, and the Pacific Highway, promoted by wealthy railroad lawyer Sam Hill. World War I proved the usefulness of planes, trains, and automobiles. President Woodrow Wilson saw the future in the motor car. On July 11, 1916, he signed the Federal Aid Road Act, a bill that provided money to states wishing to build their own roads. When engineers routed these roads, they typically followed the paths of least resistance, stitching together existing wagon and cattle trails, even ancient American Indian paths.
Each of the nation's approximately 600 auto trails each had a distinctive symbol or pole marking. This symbol would be placed on fence posts, utility poles, and bridge abutments. At major intersections, more elaborate signs would give mileage information. But on the open road, it was just a small symbol which often gave great comfort to the traveling motorist. In urban areas, the frustrated motorist would become overwhelmed by a rainbow of symbols.
Clearly, a simpler method of marking routes was needed. In 1926, that solution arrived in the form of the U.S. highway system. The system removed unique insignias from roads. In their place, it installed shields adorned with numbers, odd numbers for roads running north to south, and even numbers for those roads running east to west. Ironically, as the decades went by, many of these new numbered highways took on nicknames of their own. US 61 became the Blues Highway. US 50 was called the Loneliest Road. And US 66, perhaps best known of all, became the Mother Road. Route 66 remains unique among numbered highways in that it gained its fame from two distinct incarnations. The sadder side of Route 66 can be traced to the Great Depression. During the dirty 1930s, farmers displaced by the Dust Bowl scrambled down Route 66 in search of new lives in California. This tragedy was perfectly captured in John Steinbeck's novel, The Grapes of Wrath, and in the film that followed. On the printed page or on the silver screen, the tale remains inseparable from the road's very soul. Yet, good times inevitably follow bad. And the good times that followed the Great Depression, the great times that followed the end of World War II, rejuvenated Route 66. Tears turned to laughter as the Southwest turned to tourism. Tried and true spots of interest along the route had been welcoming visitors long before the Great Depression struck. In 1902, the first motor car had reached the Grand Canyon. By the early 1920s, roadside impresarios like Harry Indian Miller and Frederick San Diego Rawson were operating roadside zoos and museums at Walnut Canyon, Joseph City, and the Painted Desert. Now, with the war to end all wars safely in the world's rearview mirror, other entrepreneurs joined those entertaining pioneers along the Mother Road. These were the times of poodle skirts and blue suede shoes. Invented years earlier when Richard Hollingshead projected movies onto a screen nailed between trees, the drive-in theater became the preferred venue for late-night entertainment. Car hops served up fast food to hungry motorists. Elvis and Bill Haley and the Comets provided music between milkshakes. In 1955, the opening of Disneyland at Anaheim, California, completed the transformation of Route 66 from a utilitarian highway to a road that was filled with wonder.
My family, my parents and two sisters and myself moved to Elk City in 1942. And it was here I met and married Reese Queen Anne. After we were married, we went into business with the Indians. They would bring in little beadwork to us, and we would buy their little work and put it in our store there on Broadway. We would go west and trade with the traders and the Indians out west. And they, of course, made different pieces of art. They had the jewelry and the rugs and the pottery, where our Indians here was strictly all beadwork. But we always wanted a place on Highway 66. So in the year of 1948, our building was built on 2 miles west of Elk City. So our store was very busy during the years. It was just a very interesting life. My parents had a little cider stand next door to the trading post, and people liked to buy cherry and apple cider. And my dad would sit outside of the trading post and count the cars, and there'd be so many he couldn't keep up with them.
More and more and more cars. More on our roads than last year. And there'll be more next year. And the year after that, more and more cars will be built, and more cars will be bought. And every one of them will be entitled to room on our roads and highways. The thing is, will there always be room for one more car? Well, there isn't even enough room now.
Ultimately, Route 66, and many two-lane highways like it, became victims of their own popularity. So many travelers took to the American road that heavy traffic nearly prevented anyone from getting anywhere. Inspired by Germany's streamlined Autobahn, and recalling his own frustrating experience crossing the U.S. as part of a military convoy in 1919, President Dwight D. Eisenhower endorsed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. The bill funded the United States Interstate Highway System, which called for a 41,000-mile network of limited access roads. Small wonder, when the final leg of Interstate 40 was completed in the 1980s, the late great traveler Charles Perrault lamented, "It is now possible to travel from coast to coast without seeing anything." It's fortunate for today's travelers that such is not the case. Shortly after Route 66 was decommissioned in 1985, concerned citizens rallied up and down the road. To them, Route 66 was history incarnate, memories pressed into pavement. They fought back. They formed historical organizations to re-sign the road and save its old icons. Today, the spirit of Route 66 is stronger than it's ever been. It's the spirit of small-town America, of people, of life. In the end, when one looks at the story of transportation, one sees a history of people finding new ways to come together. Route 66 teaches us there are no strangers in this big backyard we call the United States. Only friends we've never met, waiting to shake our hands. I'm Thomas Rep, founder of American Road Magazine, and I thank you for spending this time with me. drive safely, and always drink well the American dream.